Hi everyone, this is Cecil and welcome to another one of our Yellowstone podcasts. One of the questions that we get asked the most often is, I'm coming to Yellowstone. It's such a huge park. I want to see as much as I can, but I don't know where to stay. So this is what I'm going to be talking about in this podcast, what the options are for staying at the various locations, both inside Yellowstone as well as outside the park. Now, it would be helpful if you could look at a map of Yellowstone, if it's safe to do so while you're listening to this podcast. And we have one on one of our sites. If you go to westyellowstonelodge.com/map, that's westyellowstonelodge.com/map, you'll see the map there. Alternatively, if you are listening to this on YouTube, the map will already be on your screen. Now, for those of you who are just listening to the audio, and if you do want to go to YouTube and check out the map while you're listening to this, and you can see me navigate around the map and show you where everything is, go to the following site. It's yellowstonepodcasts.com. That's yellowstonepodcasts.com. You can click on a link. That'll take you to YouTube, and you can just watch as I navigate around the map. So, assuming that everybody is on the map at the moment, the first thing that I'd like you to notice is that Yellowstone is a huge park, and the roads through the park make up a massive figure of 8. There's a smaller circle up at the top, and then a larger loop down at the bottom, and we in the tour business call these the lower loop of the park and the upper loop of the park. If you go down to the lower loop of the park and have a look on the left-hand side, you'll see a road leading to the left or a road leading to the west. And this is the west entrance to Yellowstone. And I'm going to go through all the entrances initially, just so you get an overall perspective of where everything is. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the west entrance, the small town of West Yellowstone. And West Yellowstone is far and away Yellowstone's busiest entrance. Let's go across now to the right, to the east side, and where you see Fishing Bridge and Lake Village. If we go to the right or to the east, we'll come to the east entrance of Yellowstone National Park. So that's entrance number 2. I'm going to zoom out a little, and let's go up to the top, to the north. We'll see Mammoth Hot Springs, and just to the north of Mammoth Hot Springs is the small town of Gardner. That is the north entrance to Yellowstone. To the right of that, so go off to the east, you'll see 2 tiny towns just outside the northeast entrance. There's Silvergate, which is really, really small, and a little bigger. You have Cook City, and we're going to go all the way down to the bottom, go south from West Thumb, and we get to Yellowstone South Entrance. So those are the 5 entrances to Yellowstone, and one way or the other, they're all associated with some form of lodging, although in 2 of the instances, the lodging, unfortunately, is a little distance away. In addition to lodging outside the park, there's also lodging inside Yellowstone National Park. Now, if you have the budget and if you book early enough, it really is preferable to stay within Yellowstone. So let's go back up to the north of the park. We'll come to Mammoth Hot Springs. Mammoth Hot Springs has a delightful hotel there, and that is the Mammoth Hot Springs Hotel and Cabins. Unfortunately for visitors, a few years ago, the National Park Service decided that they would no longer regulate pricing in the park. What used to happen in the old days is that the concessionaire inside the various national parks had to get approval for the prices that they were going to charge. Well, that is no longer the case. In the old days, it was often cheaper, believe it or not, to stay inside the park. But nowadays, that is not the case. So you've got the Mammoth Hot Springs Hotel and Cabins up over there. Going a little to the right, to the east, we come across Roosevelt Lodge and Cabins. Even though it's called a lodge, there's really only cabins to stay at over here. They are fairly primitive, but as I'll go into a little more detail, it gives you really nice access to Lamar Valley. Then let's go a little bit further down. On the right-hand side, you'll see Canyon Village. And Canyon Village has Canyon Lodge and Cabins. Now, if you're looking at the map, let's go all the way to the very top. The more popular areas have got little maps of their own. So I'm looking at the Mammoth Hot Springs one at the moment now, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, and you can see in a lot more detail where the hotel is. Then if we come across to Canyon Village, you'll see where Canyon Lodge is at Mammoth, at Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. Then I'm going to go down a little bit, and you've got the absolutely delightful Lake Lodge Cabins, as well as Lake Yellowstone Hotel. Now, the hotel particularly is a wonderful historic old building. It's just really a magnificent place to stay. Let's come down a little bit more, go to the left or to the west, and we'll see Old Faithful. Now, there are a number of places to stay at Old Faithful. You've got Old Faithful Inn. Let me tell you what, Old Faithful Inn is probably the most wonderful building in the entire national park system, not only in Yellowstone, but in the entire system. It is just such an amazing building, and I'll tell you more about it in another one of our Yellowstone podcasts, so keep an eye open or an ear open for that. In addition, at the Old Faithful area, you've got the Old Faithful Snow Lodge and Cabins, as well as the Old Faithful Lodge Cabin. So there's 3 different areas where you can stay there, and if we zoom in a little bit on the Old Faithful area, we can see where Old Faithful Lodge is. I'm just showing it to you. We can see where Snow Lodge is, and then even though the name sign is on the left, the Old Faithful Inn, if you come a little to the right, you can see where Old Faithful Inn as well is Old Faithful Inn is as well. Then going down and to the south, you've got Grant Village. Grant Village is a little off the beaten path as far as accommodation in Yellowstone goes, but it's basically right on Yellowstone Lake, so it's also a delightful place to stay. All right then, so where should you stay? I mentioned before, I think that lodging within Yellowstone is really popular, and even at the new prices, the lodging within the park sells out really, really quickly. If we go over to the left, we'll see West Yellowstone, which is at the west entrance to Yellowstone National Park, and I mentioned before that the west entrance is the busiest entrance, and the reason is pretty simple. Because if you're coming from almost any western city, and Salt Lake City is the closest major airport, but if you're coming from any large western city, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Phoenix, just about anywhere on the west coast, you're going to find that the west entrance is the easiest entrance for you to access. The first question now that you need to ask yourself is, and this assumes that you're staying in Yellowstone for more than just one night, do I want to stay in one place for the entire time, or do I want to try and move around? I told you before that Yellowstone is a huge park. If you're looking at the map, just look how big that lower loop is. And people say, well, how long does it take me to go around the lower loop? Well, I live in West Yellowstone on the left here. And one day I just wanted to take a picture early one morning at Sulphur Cauldron, because the best time to see Sulphur Cauldron, I think, is first thing in the morning with the sun rising obviously to the east and highlighting the steam coming off thermal features across the river. So I took a drive over there and then continued over the rest of the loop. I really didn't stop much, and I think it took me 3.5 hours, but that's because I only stopped at one place. You could spend weeks, literally weeks, doing the lower loop of the park. So it really depends on how much detail you want to see Yellowstone in. So if you're coming up here for 3 or 4 days, my recommendation to you would be to start off in one location, and I'm going to say West Yellowstone to start off with, and then try and do as much as you can in the lower loop. And then let's say you wanted to go to the Lamar Valley and see some of the wildlife, then perhaps consider staying at Gardner, where there's a lot more hotels and motels and Airbnbs and whatnot than there are in Cook City, say. So my advice to you from that perspective would be try and stay in a number of different locations. Now, the flip side to that, of course, is that once you've settled in, you don't want to move your hotel. It's more comfortable and convenient just to stay in the one location. And yes, that is a valid point. Let's say now, though, that you're coming to Yellowstone with a specific goal. Let's say that you just want to see the thermal features. And when I say the thermal features, I'm talking about the geysers, which everybody has heard of, the hot springs, which you've heard of, as well as 2 other features called mud pots and fumaroles. And I won't go into detail on those now, but you can hear about them in various other of our Yellowstone podcasts. So the lower loop is the place to go for the thermal features. So if that is what your interest is, well, perhaps consider staying somewhere on the lower loop. Now, if you look at the map, and those of you who are watching this on YouTube can see me tracing out a soft purple line around that more or less follows the lower loop, and that is the line showing where the caldera is or was. And a caldera basically is a gigantic hole in the ground, and this occurred in the case of Yellowstone when there was the last gigantic explosion, the last gigantic eruption caused by the massive Yellowstone volcano, and depending on which source you go to, maybe 625,000 years ago. And that gives us, in very, very broad terms, an outline of why most of Yellowstone's thermal features are to be found on the lower loop. Just have a look at where the caldera is, and I go into that in a lot more detail in other Yellowstone podcasts. So if you want to see the thermal features, if you want to see the various geysers, most of Yellowstone's thermal features that are to be found fairly readily are in the part of the park that I'm circling at the moment. And for those of you who are not watching this and you're just listening to it, the lower sort of left-hand corner, that is where the main geyser basins are. This is where you can see the lower geyser basin, the midway geyser basin, and the upper geyser basin, which are the 3 main geyser basins. And in addition, in that area, you have Biscuit Basin and Black Sand Basin. So if you want to see the thermal features, perhaps stay in the small town of West Yellowstone. Having said that, don't forget, though, that there is lodging available at Old Faithful. As I mentioned before, you've got 3 places to stay in the Old Faithful area. You've got Old Faithful Inn, which is the most wonderful place. I do need to caution you, though, that Old Faithful Inn was built at a time, and it's over 100 years old now. Old Faithful Inn was built at a time when it wasn't considered essential to have a toilet or a bathroom in each room. So some of the rooms at Old Faithful Inn actually have communal facilities, and if that's important to you, take that into consideration before deciding where you're going to stay. So the Old Faithful area over here, and I'm showing it to those people who are watching it, is an option. You could stay at one of the 3 hotels there, but let's not forget West Thumb. West Thumb is right at the south portion of the lower loop, and really close to it is Grant Village. So if you're lucky enough to be able to get lodging at Grant, it's very, very easy to get from Grant to West Thumb, and from there over Craig Pass to the Old Faithful area. Now I'm going to digress just for a moment. Please be really careful when you're coming at the start and end of the summer seasons. So most of you probably know that Yellowstone is closed in between the summer season and the winter season, and then again between the winter season and the summer season. And in the winter season, except for the north entrance and the road between the north entrance and the northeast entrance, you can't take your car into Yellowstone. So you can only go in by snowmobile and snow coach. So the reason I mention that you need to be careful at the start and end of the seasons is that some roads in Yellowstone open later than others. So let's say that you are staying down south here, and I'll tell you more about the lodging down south shortly, and you are coming up into the park to West Thumb, and you wanted to turn left or west and go over Craig Pass. Well, guess what? Craig Pass is one of the last roads in the park to open. So it may not be accessible if you're staying somewhere to the south. Similarly, if you come and visit us in the fall and there's snow, and we get a lot of snow, particularly in October and then in the first week of November, well then Craig Pass may be closed. And not only will Craig Pass be closed, but if we come over to the east entrance all the way to the right, that road is also going to be closed. There's a mountain pass called Sylvan Pass, which is really, really steep. And I think we can see Sylvan Pass on the map. There it is there. You will find that Sylvan Pass will get closed in very short order by the Park Service. What the National Park Service in Yellowstone has started doing the last few years is being very proactive, kind of like the airlines. When the airlines see that there's a storm coming, they will cancel flights days ahead of time. So when the Park Service sees that there's bad weather moving in, they will then shut the roads down. But these days they give us advance warning of it. Now, there's a very useful site that you can go to. If you just go to Google and Google Yellowstone roads, that's all you do. Just Google Yellowstone roads. The first link that comes up is the Park Service link to the roads in Yellowstone. And they have a map there, and they'll show you which roads are closed at any given time. That's particularly useful if you're coming in from the east or from the south, when there's a decent chance in the fall and the spring that roads are going to be closed. So let's get back to what I was talking about before. I was saying that if you wanted to see the thermal features, you may consider staying in West Yellowstone. Let's say that wildlife is what you're really interested in. Well, one of the best places anywhere in the world to see wolves is right up here, the top right-hand portion of the map in the Lamar Valley. So if you wanted to see wolves, you could either stay at Roosevelt Lodge, or you could stay at the northeast entrance in Silvergate or Cook City. But remember that lodging there is really limited. Or what many people do, stay in Gardner, where the access to Lamar Valley is so much easier than if you're staying in Yellowstone's Yellowstone's west entrance in West Yellowstone. Let's now consider staying in Cody, Wyoming. Cody is a great town. It really is. Apart from anything else, it's got the Buffalo Bill Historic Center, which is 5 museums in one. Now, for those of you who look in and can see the map, this is where the east entrance is on the right-hand side. For those of you who are not looking at the map and just listening to the audio, the east entrance to Yellowstone is accessed by taking the road from Fishing Bridge and heading more or less east around Yellowstone Lake initially until you get to the east entrance. The problem, though, is that I know that it says 53 miles on the map, But from the east entrance off to Cody is about 52 miles. So it's a decent distance to drive. So bear in mind, if you're going to stay in Cody, you will have that drive. It's probably about an hour and 10 minutes to get from Cody to the east entrance. It's a delightful drive, though, and as I tell you about in another podcast, just outside the east entrance is a great place to be looking for grizzly bears, but take the necessary precautions. Also, remember what I said. If you are staying at Cody, there is a possibility, if there's any likelihood of adverse weather, that the Sylvan Pass is going to be closed just to the west of where you enter the east entrance. Now, let's take a look at Yellowstone's south entrance. To get to the south entrance, you would go to West Thumb and make your way down to the south entrance. However, the closest major place to stay is Jackson, Wyoming. However, to get to Jackson, Wyoming, and you don't see it on this map, you pass through what's called the Rockefeller Parkway, and then to the south of the Rockefeller Parkway is Grand Teton National Park. So you can go through the Rockefeller Parkway, go through Grand Teton, then you get to Jackson, Wyoming. Jackson is an awesome little town. It really is. They've really preserved the quaint western cowboy feel of the town. The downside is that rooms are really expensive. Rooms are even more expensive there than they are in West Yellowstone. And then you also have that drive, but then it's a beautiful drive coming up through Grand Teton. But if you've seen Grand Teton, you then have quite a bit of driving to do to get into Yellowstone. Now, there are places to stay in Grand Teton National Park, and I'm not going to go through them in this podcast. Similarly, let's get back to the east entrance. If you are coming from Cody towards the east entrance, you don't necessarily have to stay in Cody. There are some really delightful Airbnbs and little ranches and dude ranches and motels on the road in between Cody and the east entrance. So take some time, investigate those. They can be a great place. Those can be a great place to stay at as well. Going a little further afield, if we go back to the northeast entrance, go past Silvergate and Cook City, there is the road over what's called the Beartooth Highway towards a place called Red Lodge. The Beartooth Highway is literally one of the most stunning places, stunning roads in all of America. Now, I keep on saying stunning and awesome and beautiful and delightful and whatnot, but it's true. This whole area is just so magical. But Red Lodge is a distance away. So if you're approaching from the east, you have, generally speaking, two ways you can get into Yellowstone: the east entrance or the northeast entrance. And if you choose to take the northeast entrance, if you're on Interstate 90, for example, you may like to stay at Red Lodge the day before you access Yellowstone, before the day before you drive into Yellowstone itself. So, in a nutshell, you've got the lodging within the park, you've got the lodging outside the 5 entrances to Yellowstone, some of them a little bit further than others. If you're only going to be in our area in Yellowstone for one night, well then choose whichever entrance is going to be closest to you. If you're going to stay for more than one night, balance up. Is it more convenient as to whether you stay in one place so you don't have to move hotels, or perhaps spend a couple of nights in the one location and then move somewhere else? Guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. You can see a lot of who we are and what our company does at WestYellowstoneLodge.com, which is a site for our motel. That's WestYellowstoneLodge.com. You can see our YouTube channel at virtualyellowstonetours.com. That's virtualyellowstonetours.com. We're also one of the largest providers of tours across the western United States. And please go to usaparktours.com, usaparktours.com to see those. If you want to see the Yellowstone tours, they can be seen at usaparktours.com/Yellowstone, usaparktours.com/Yellowstone. We offer tours from West Yellowstone as well as from most major cities in the western United States, including Salt Lake, Vegas, LA, San Francisco, Seattle, Phoenix, San Diego, and various others. And finally, you can see or listen to all of our Yellowstone podcasts at yellowstonepodcasts.com. That's yellowstonepodcasts.com. Thank you, and hope to see you in Yellowstone sometime.